Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Renewed Israeli airstrikes on Gaza raise the death toll to 9. Anti-Assad protests continue unabated in Syria despite the violence. And as Egypt's deposed president nears death, activists rally to kill millions of mini-Hosnis. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
Israeli warplanes and assassination drones continue pounding the Gaza Strip for a third consecutive day. A drone attack killed a 14-year-old Palestinian in Gaza's Zaytun neighborhood. Another person lost his life in an Israeli airstrike in Rafah. The attack targeted a man on a motorcycle near the Egyptian border. At least 9 people have been killed in attacks on the besieged territory since Monday. There seems to be no end in sight to Tel Aviv's ground and air assaults on Gaza. Israel also refuses to lift a crippling blockade on the 1.5 million people living in the tiny enclave.
For the third consecutive day, Israeli warplanes continued to pound different targets across the Gaza Strip, causing casualties and destruction to properties. This residential house was targeted in the early hours of Wednesday, causing damage to the house and nearby houses in Zaytun neighborhood south of Gaza City. Luckily, no one was killed, but the family members, especially children, are still in shock and left traumatized by the loud explosion as they watched missiles landing on their house, setting 2 civilian cars belonging to the family on fire.
At 1 a.m. local time, we were awoken by a powerful explosion. The missile targeted our garage and the 2 cars, including mine, were set on fire. My father and neighbors tried to extinguish the fire, but an Apache helicopter opened the fire at them. We are civilians and not affiliated to any political or resistant faction. I wonder why they targeted our house.
Israel has said its air attacks carried out for defensive purposes and in response to the homemade rocket fire from Gaza. Up to the preparation of this report, the death toll has reached 9 and over 14 injuries. Human rights activists called for an end to Israel's disproportionate force, which they described as collateral damage.
The way that Israel has been engaging is essentially what I would personally call collateral murder. It knows that it's going to incur innocent civilian collateral damage, but it continues to do so because in the eyes of Israel, Israeli blood is more valuable than Palestinian blood, and the world must reject this.
This military escalation comes amid anticipation of who would be Egypt's president. Analysts say that Egypt must intervene to convince both Hamas and Israel to go back to the fragile ceasefire, which has been in effect for many months, in order to avoid more bloodshed.
Seems to me that the Egyptians will have to intervene, especially the High Military Council led by Tantawi. They will have to intervene and convince both sides, Hamas and Israel, to de-escalate the situation and go back to the Tahdi'ah. But I would imagine that we will probably see more escalation in the coming few days.
The Israeli military frequently attack the coastal territory using disproportionate force, causing not only casualties and destruction, but trauma among the civilian population as well. Besieged Gaza's 1.7 million people who live in what is known the world's largest open-air prison have accustomed to such military escalation, longing for the day where they can live a normal life away from bloodshed. Yusuf Al-Halo, Press TV, Gaza.
Open in the south, where the violence continues. Over 60 missiles have been fired from Gaza into Israel since yesterday morning, including several heavy Grad rockets launched by Palestinian terrorists at the western Negev, striking as far as Beersheba. This afternoon, IDF aircraft hit a terror squad in the southern Gaza Strip, where they targeted and killed one of those directly responsible for the planning of the fatal attack on the Sinai-Israel border on Monday. More in this report from IBA's Dennis Zinn.
Air Force planes attacked 6 terror bases in the Gaza Strip overnight in response to the missile barrages that were fired at Israel over the last few days. This afternoon, one terrorist was killed and another seriously wounded by an IDF airstrike in the Rafah area of the southern Gaza Strip. The terrorists were identified as members of the World Salafi Jihad movement attached to Al-Qaeda, who were involved in the planning of the terror attack on the Sinai border 2 days ago, in which Israeli contractor Said Pshapsha was killed. A short time later, 6 Qassam rockets slammed into a community in the Eshkol Regional Council, sending residents into their shelters and causing a huge bushfire. In all, some 15 missiles, including Grad and Qassam rockets, were fired at the western Negev today, adding to the scores that were launched yesterday and overnight. During the night, a Qassam exploded in a border police facility just south of Ashkelon. One policeman was seriously injured and another 3 were hospitalized with light wounds. Minister of Internal Security Yitzhak Aharonovich said that Israel cannot come to terms with rocket fire at its citizens, and the onus is on the IDF to respond forcefully. He blamed the Hamas rulers in Gaza for the recent escalation in violence. Police Chief Yochanan Danino said he expects the unrest to continue in the days to come. He said that he ordered a beefed-up deployment of police officers in the south to help cope with the situation. The IDF Home Command has ordered a state of alert in Gaza border communities in a radius of 15 kilometers or less from the Gaza Strip. All public functions of 500 people or more have been prohibited. After being targeted by Grad rockets from Gaza, residents of Beersheba and Netivot today complained that the red alert sirens did not operate to warn them of an incoming missile. The Iron Dome system was also not put into action, probably because the rockets either landed in areas close to the Gaza Strip or because they did not endanger population centers. Dennis Zinn, IBA News.
In other news, a group of Jewish settlers from Beit slated for eviction under an Israeli court order say that they will leave their disputed homes in the Ulpana neighborhood quietly, sparing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a showdown with a core constituency. IBA's Eli Wogelenter joins us now with the details. Eli.
Thank you, Erin. Ongoing negotiations over the fate of the residents of the Ulpana neighborhood of Beit continued late last night until an agreement was finally hammered out. The residents of the 5 apartment buildings ordered by the court to be evacuated agreed to voluntarily leave their homes by July 1st. That accord was reached only after the Prime Minister's office pledged to build 300 new homes in Beit along with a promise that the homes they live in now will be relocated. The agreement between the residents and the government was signed after 10 days of talks between government representatives and leaders of Beit including the town's rabbi, Rav Zalman Baruch Melamed, and its mayor, Moshe Rosenbaum. The residents of the Ulpana neighborhood clarified in a statement last night that they were accepting the agreement, quote, with a heavy heart. They quoted from Rabbi Melamed, who said that the deal reached is like telling a father that his son will be taken away from him in exchange for 10 others. The pain of the houses that are being taken away will not cease, and the stain will not be removed from the government. However, we are peaceful people. The state reiterated the commitment made by Prime Minister Netanyahu that this evacuation does not constitute a precedent for the future, and that the state will ask the High Court of Justice for some more time to allow the houses to be dismantled rather than demolished by bulldozers.
Settlers burned a mosque last night in the village of Jabba, northeast of occupied Jerusalem. They also wrote racist and anti-Arab and Muslim graffiti on the mosque's walls, threatening to carry out additional aggressions.
As part of the settlers' atrocities, the residents of the village of Jab'a, located northeast of occupied Jerusalem, woke up to a fire engulfing the Zayd bin Haritha mosque. The peaceful village has witnessed a series of aggressions in various forms and shapes, which the occupation and its settlers alternate in carrying out.
At 1:30 a.m., part of the mosque was on fire. The flame had reached the upper windows. We rushed to the fire site, which is a mosque, and thank God the fire was controlled. Though a large part of the mosque was burned, the fire did not spread to the entire mosque, and it was controlled. This is a criminal act that should be condemned by everyone.
Even houses of worship, where God's name is recited, are no longer safe from aggression. The mosque was damaged by the flames of the haters who wrote racist slogans hostile to our people, vowing to launch additional retaliatory attacks.
This attack was carried out by a group of settlers. They left the evidence of their crime by writing a series of racist slogans on the mosque's walls. The settlers attacked this mosque and therefore attacked the convictions of every Muslim, whether they are in Palestine or in Senegal or any other country.
Although this crime was committed under the cover of the night, it could not have been completed without the occupation army's protection of the settlers who carried out their disgraceful action. The settlers have burned a number of mosques in Burkina, Yusuf in Salfit, Barqa, Al-Mughayr in Ramallah, and the Lubban al-Sharqiyya in Nablus, as well as the mosques in the village of Tuba in the Upper Galilee, and the Beit Fajjar Mosque in Bethlehem.
We initiated the formation of committees for civil protection that, thank God, managed to foil a number of attempts by the settlers to burn and vandalize mosques and houses in the middle of the night across various areas in the West Bank. These committees will continue to expand to include all mosques and neighborhoods.
Every time the occupation army comes to a mosque, it deploys its tanks and forces to open an investigation into the incident and pursue the settlers who carried out the attack. But the investigations end as soon as they start, and the scene continues to repeat itself without anyone being held accountable or punished. On the contrary, the offenders are rewarded for their actions. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that 58 people, including a large number of regime soldiers, were killed today across Syria. Most of them died in the countryside of Damascus and Daraa, which was shelled by helicopters. According to the Syrian Revolution's General Commission, the neighborhoods of Homs and Hama witnessed heavy artillery shelling. Meanwhile, anti-regime protests broke out in different parts of the country.
This is Talbisa near Homs as it endures its 17th day of continuous artillery shelling, according to opposition activists. Talbisa is not the only Syrian city being subjected to intensified artillery shelling. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported violent clashes in a number of regions. The most severe took place in the countryside of Latakia, leading to the death of regime soldiers. Opposition activists uploaded images of Hama, which they say is under heavy shelling that led to the burning of houses and stores. Activists said that areas in the countryside of Damascus are still witnessing seesaw battles, as the two sides of the conflict are attempting to seize as much control of these areas as possible. The significance of the site lies in its proximity to the capital Damascus, the headquarters of the powers that be. Also in Damascus, opposition activists said most stores and markets shut down as part of a general strike to protest the repressive practices of the regime forces. Activists uploaded images online showing those they say are members of the government forces breaking the locks of stores on strike. Syria's state media only showed one side of the press conference of the Syrian representative to the UN, Bashar al-Jafari, as he held what he referred to as armed terrorist groups responsible for the escalation of violence in the country. The Syrian scene is not devoid of anti-regime protests. While some neighborhoods in Daraa are witnessing heavy helicopter shelling, these masses came out to demand change. The same can be seen in Idlib, where shelling and clashes caused casualties. Meanwhile, others held demonstrations calling for arming the revolutionaries, in light of the failure to reach diplomatic solutions to the crisis that is still in a deadlock. Ahmad Shihab, BBC.
Reports conflicted about the status of deposed President Hosni Mubarak. He is in a coma, according to official Egyptian sources, as media and security sources reported that Mubarak suffered a stroke and that his heart stopped beating. He was saved by electric shocks more than once.
لم يكن مفاجئا خبر الإعلان عن الحالة الصحية الحرجة.
The announcement of the critical health condition of deposed President Hosni Mubarak was not surprising after the people extracted him from the euphoria of power to the court's cages.
مع ذلك استحوذ على مساحات واسعة من الإعلام المصري فيما كان الشعب يقول.
However, he still dominated Egyptian media as the people were reiterating their chants in Tahrir Square in protest to the military council's counter-revolution after it acquired additional powers by issuing a constitutional decree.
بالإعلان الدستوري المكمل.
We are here today to bring down this decree, and we will be here on Friday, and especially if it escalates. We will protest here until the end of military rule.
مصادر طبية وعسكرية أعلنت أن مبارك أصيب بجلطة.
Medical and military sources announced that Mubarak suffered a stroke and is in a coma that doctors tried to bring him out of, but his current condition is critical. The Egyptian street that is more concerned with the fate of the revolution than Mubarak's health expressed a desire to cleanse the country of the figureheads of the former regime, who still hold sensitive positions in the government.
في مراكز حساسة في السلطة والنظام.
Not just Hosni. We want to get rid of the millions of Hosnis. The Hosnis on the street, in the offices, everywhere. Hosni is not alone. The entire system in Egypt, all the ministries of Egypt, have their Hosni.
Others expressed relief at the news after he had enslaved the country and religion during his rule, as the people continue to suffer from deprivation.
Look at what they have and what we have. Look at where we are and who we are.
مبارك الذي يبلغ من العمر 84 عاما.
The 84-year-old Mubarak, who ruled Egypt for 3 decades, was transferred to a military hospital from Tora Prison Hospital, where he was serving his life sentence. He was convicted of killing revolutionaries, even though a judicial declaration was not issued. Observers of the Egyptian scene considered it a possible attempt to get him out of prison.
Our Al Jazeera correspondent in Kuwait reported that opposition representatives resigned from the former National Assembly that was reinstated today by the Constitutional Court.
This comes after the Constitutional Court issued a ruling voiding the parliamentary elections that were conducted earlier this year.
According to the court, since the parliamentary elections are invalid, the current assembly must be dissolved and the former assembly, whose majority supports the government, is to be restored.
The Kuwaiti National Assembly that was elected a few months ago no longer exists. Kuwait's Constitutional Court decided to dissolve it. This court's verdicts are not subject to criticism and its rulings are final. The dissolution comes after repeated crises between the government and the National Assembly. The situation had escalated to the extent that the Emir of Kuwait issued a decision suspending the assembly for a month, one day before government ministers were set to be questioned. However, dissolving the assembly did not have any connection to the chaotic relationship it has with the government. The issue started with calls that the 2012 elections were unconstitutional after members of the former National Assembly filed a lawsuit at the Constitutional Court. And with the ruling that voids the 2012 elections, the previous assembly will be reinstated. The difference between the two assemblies is obvious in terms of their political composition. The dissolved assembly holds a majority of opposition figures, most of them are Islamists, while the former assembly is described as close to the government and its policies. In addition, a number of representatives of the former assembly are accused of corruption.
The talks between the West and Iran over the latter's nuclear program have failed in Moscow. The 2-day talks ended with the two sides agreeing to meet again next month in Istanbul. Both sides confirmed they have started to tackle critical issues, but warned that significant gaps still exist between them. With this, the Russians have failed to achieve political gains on the international front. Karim Al-Muthafar reports from Moscow.
Iran and world powers are back to square one. The Russian-sponsored talks failed to bring about a solution to the Iranian nuclear program, shattering Moscow's hopes of achieving political gains. Despite confirmations by both sides of tackling critical issues for the first time, the talks ended with no results, except for an expert-level meeting slated for July 3rd in Istanbul. The lack of trust and the significant differences in their positions kept the two sides apart.
The E3+3.
The E3+3 remains absolutely committed to the proposal presented earlier in Baghdad, namely for Iran to stop enriching uranium to the 20% level of purity, ship the existing stockpiles abroad, and shut down its enrichment facilities.
According to Russian observers, Iran displayed diplomatic superiority during these meetings, which enabled it to avoid obstacles placed by the U.S. and the West to prevent it from joining the World Nuclear Association.
After the expert-level talks produce practical results, meetings will be held between the deputy heads of the delegations. Then I'll make contact with Catherine Ashton. I hope that the next round of talks will be successful.
However, all sides agree that hopes alone will not be enough to resolve the crisis, regardless of the number of meetings and their location. Russian diplomacy has thrown its weight behind these talks aimed at resolving the Iranian nuclear issue by adopting a policy that appeals to all sides. However, the West remains skeptical of the peaceful nature of the Iranian nuclear program, which thwarted the Russian efforts and brought the crisis back to square one. Karim Al-Muthafer, Dubai TV, Moscow.
The investigation into the burning of copies of the Holy Quran at Afghanistan's Bagram base last February has ended with recommendations for disciplinary actions against 7 U.S. military personnel, as confirmed by a U.S. military official speaking on the condition of anonymity. The official said the matter will be handled by the troops' commander. The burning of the copies of the Quran had sparked a wave of protests and demonstrations that continued for days in Afghanistan.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.